Hi, I'm Lee. Originally, I gave this talk in Canada, so I had this really great slide of Justin Trudeau with a couple of baby pandas, and even though the joke doesn't work anymore, I'm going to show it to you anyway. I don't need to be in Canada to show you a picture of Justin Trudeau with baby pandas. Anyway, I live and work here in Portland, Oregon at a company called Tilda. I work on our product Skylight, which is a Rails profiler, so that means we have an app that helps Rails apps be better Rails apps. I'm here today to talk to you about two programming languages, Ruby and Rust, and how I built basically the same text-based adventure game twice. Once with Ruby and once with Rust. So why Ruby? Why Rust? Why did I do any of this at all? So, Ruby and Rust are both pretty different, but they're both really cool. I had a few false starts over the years trying to learn how to program, but Ruby was the first language that I was able to really get into. If you don't already know anything about it, Ruby was designed around the idea of programmer happiness. It's very expressive and easy to learn and similar to written English. So as you can see here, writing something like 10 times do puts Ruby is great. We'll just print Ruby is great to the console 10 times. You can read it almost like a sentence, so it's a very popular first language for people first getting into programming. You don't have to think too hard about what's happening under the hood to get started and make things work, even if you don't know much about programming yet. So one of the first things I made when I started learning to code was a text-based adventure game. I've written a few little ones over the years, usually when I'm trying to learn a new language or if I'm playing with a new idea. Some of you may never have played one, but it's basically a game where everything is text. In my case, the whole game is played in your terminal like it's the 80s. So the way it works is you get a prompt, usually a sentence or two, followed by a question like, you are in a dark forest. You see a light in the north. You have a map. What do you do? And then you type something like, look at map. Then the computer responds with something else. And then you type something else. And the computer responds, and so on and so forth, until your character dies or the game is over. I think nowadays games like this are also called interactive fiction. I don't know. But let's take a quick look at the actual game I wrote to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. So, bear with me one moment while I unmirror this. Or remirror it? Yes, sorry. So I'm going to make this a little bigger. Okay. So, what's your name? My name is Lee. What would you like to do? Help. I'll look around. This room contains a rare and glorious unicorn. It's amazing. This room contains a jar of unicorn farts. Unicorn Doctor is here too. What now? Well, I can talk to Unicorn Doctor. Hi, I'm a Unicorn Doctor. It's pretty cool. I have a vial of unicorn blood. Do you want it? Hell yeah, I want it. Take a vial of unicorn blood. Take vial of unicorn blood. Cool, alright, use vial of unicorn blood. The amazing unicorn blood has made you invincible. Vial of unicorn blood has been removed from your inventory. Okay, that's fine, I'm good. So now I'm going to unmirror, and let's go back to Keynote. Okay, so, anyway, it makes sense that when I decided I wanted to learn Rust, that I build yet another text-based adventure game. So what is Rust, and why did I want to learn it in the first place? Well, about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I decided I wanted to learn a lower level language, something more close to the metal, so to speak, that didn't abstract away as much as Ruby does. I wanted to learn and understand more about what goes on under the hood when I'm talking to my computer. Fortunately, at that time, I just started working at Tilda, where I get to work with Yehuda Katz, who's on the Rust core team. So that means that if anyone's going to know about Rust, it's going to be that guy. And at least part of our product, Skylight, is written in Rust, so it made perfect sense for me to learn it. I also knew it was a newer language being actively developed. I really wanted to get involved in open source. And I'm really interested in how programming languages work, so it seemed like a perfect thing to get into. I mean, I love Ruby, but the whole ecosystem was pretty much all set by the time I got to it. Rust, on the other hand, everything with Rust was still new, so it was very exciting and changing all the time, and I wanted to learn all about it. So I decided to build basically the same game, one in Ruby and one in Rust, so I could more easily compare and contrast the pros and cons of each language. Also, I wanted to build my confidence a little bit, building one piece of the game using a language I was pretty comfortable with, and then implementing the same or similar feature in a new language I was still learning, so on until I had some kind of working game. So before I wrote a single line of code, I had to think about the architecture, and there are a million different ways you could structure it. I'm not a game dev at all, so I wanted something super simple, so I went with an extremely basic loop. It continues to ask what the player wants to do next until a particular condition is met, at which point the game ends. So in this example, which I stress is not real code, just an example of the structure I was using, we start by defining playing as true, and while playing is true, the game asks, what do you want to do next? It then parses whatever the subsequent user input is, and then performs an action based on that input. Like, if the user says, move north, then the player's position is changed, and maybe we output something like, you have moved north. We don't exit the loop until the user dies, or the game ends, or something else happens that we define, at which point playing is redefined as false. So what does it look like in Ruby or Rust? In Ruby, there's a lot going on before we get to the play method, but that's where the loop is, so that's what I'm showing you. This is a method on the game class which is initialized with a player, a map, an array of rooms, and with the value of playing as true. So as long as playing remains true, the game will keep asking, what now? And then it'll parse what the user types and respond to that. So this example is ignoring a lot of other code I wrote to support it, much like the Ruby example. But for the sake of simplicity, here you can see we are creating a player, a map, a game. And you can see that while game.playing, game play. Pretty close to what I illustrated earlier. What you can't see, though, is that unlike Ruby, I had to write my own new method, because Rust doesn't automatically give you anything like Ruby's initialize. Otherwise, it seems pretty similar to the Ruby version, just a little more code, which is fine. So at first glance, both implementations of a similar idea look pretty similar. But however, there's a lot of code I'm not showing you, just because there's so much of it, and we only have 10 minutes. So what I'd like to focus on instead is the experience of writing it. You can look at all the real code on GitHub after the talk if you want to see the whole thing, and I'll give you a link. Anyway, with Ruby, I felt like I could just write whatever I wanted, like I was journaling code. Like I could just make something work quickly, get all my feelings out, and then reorganize it as I went. It's easy to have a real flow, like you're just writing, in a journal. It's like the downside of this is that it's really easy to get caught up in that emotional flow, and you just forget to check things out as you go, and you forget to write tests, and then you forget every single part of the program you just wrote, and then it breaks, and you're like, oh no. So periodically I'd run the program, and things would just break without adding a whole bunch of tests after the fact, which isn't great. I didn't have a lot of confidence that something wouldn't just, fall apart at runtime. All because I got caught up and I forgot to check things out as I went along. Rust, on the other hand, is the reverse experience. Since Rust needs to be compiled before you run it, the compiler literally won't let you run the program until you fix all the stuff it doesn't like. So not coincidentally, I haven't run into those kind of bugs in the Rust version, probably because the compiler caught them before it would have become a problem. So this can be really frustrating when you're first learning Rust, because it can be so satisfying just to see something work. And you can be working for hours just seeing errors over and over and over, and it can become so disheartening that if you're new to it, so yeah. The best way I can think of to compare Ruby and Rust in terms of my personal experience with the two is they're like two different parenting styles. This might seem like an odd comparison. Bear with me. Ruby is like those hippie parents who they let their kids do whatever they want. Lie naked in a bed in a tent, whatever. You don't put a whole lot of restrictions on them. They know the kids will figure it out. They'll be fine. The downside is that the kids will hit all these bumps in the road along the way because no one ever said, like, don't walk in the middle of the street when there's cars coming. So Rust is like Rust is like those parents who are constantly telling their kids what's best for them. They're a little bit strict. They're not that bad. They love their kids, but but they're always giving unsolicited advice based on their own experiences. And you're like, I'm just trying to live my life. You don't know, like, come on, Mom. So maybe it turns out their advice was right, but it's definitely a little annoying to be hearing it all the time. Just like parents, you can't really say one way of doing things is better or worse than another. Each has, they have the pros and cons depending on what you're trying to do and how you prefer to work. I'm sure someone with more experience than me could give you a more in-depth analysis, but this is my opinion based on my limited experience writing a simple text game. So if you're thinking of learning Rust or Ruby or both, I say, go for it. You can feel free to take a look at the repo for the game. There's instructions in the README about how to set it up. Both the Ruby and the Rust games should work, but both of them don't have like a real good story, as you can see with the unicorn farts thing. Like, that's not really a narrative. It's just a bunch of weird placeholder stuff, but you might enjoy it anyway. And I think in my notes I said there's a bug that allows you to pick up a jar of unicorn farts over and over and over. I forgot about that. Anyway, if you want to talk about any of this, you can catch me later, or you can talk to me on Twitter. Thank you very much.